Right, so I know you've had a long morning, so I'm not going to bore you guys with any PowerPoint slides. I have no PowerPoint slides. I think consultants are guilty of presenting too many. But rather what I want to do is take the next 15, 20 minutes to share with you our perspectives on how banking has innovated, how banks have innovated, what the future of banking and banks is, and how fintechs play a role in helping banks and banking innovate. Now, it's important that we make the distinction between banking and what banks do. So banking has been there from the beginning of time when people were trading, when you had IOUs, transactions, etc. So you had some sort of exchange of goods and services, bartering, etc. But then we had banks come up, and what banks would provide is that security, safety, comfort, trust, etc., when transactions were taking place. But then if you look at banks over the last 150 years, we haven't seen that much by way of innovation or progression, right? How many people think here today that in the last 5, 10 years, banks have actually innovated? They've come up with something which you can say is really innovation. How many people think that? Yeah? Okay, what do you think, sir? What is the innovation banks have done? But that's a channel, right? So you got to make the distinction between innovation of a product and service versus renovation of a channel, okay? So what digital banking is allowing you to do on your phone, what you could have done at a branch or an ATM, right? But the real innovation, actually the only real innovation that banks have done in the last 30, 40 years is the ATM machine. That was the first real innovation that banks did, where banking, which historically used to be confined to a branch, where you had to physically go within the hours of 9 to 5 or whenever, you could now go to the ATM anytime, and you could withdraw cash, okay? And then the second was the digital one, which really took what you do a bit at the ATM, a bit at the branch, and put it on your phone. But other than just sending or receiving payments, what more can you do with digital banking? Is there anything more? Can you update your KYC using your phone? No. Can you open an account end-to-end if you're a new-to-bank customer? No. So what can you really do on your phone? Check balances, maybe send and receive money. What else? Can you do anything else? Can you talk to your advisor? Can you chat with your banking advisor? Yes, no, maybe. You can chat to a chatbot, yeah? So you can see that banks themselves haven't really innovated that much when it comes to actual products and services. And for many banks, digital means going paperless, going branchless. But that's not what digital banking or the future of banking is all about, right? So my own hypothesis is that in the future, you will still have banking like you had before banks existed, but the role of banks is going to change, especially in the retail banking side. They're becoming more and more invisible. Do you care, when you receive a payment from somebody, do you care which bank sent you the payment? No, right? When you get a check, do you care which bank sent it to you? No. When you get a credit card, do you really care about the product features, the points, the cashback, or do you actually care about the bank that gave it to you? You don't care about the bank. As a retail customer, we don't actually care about who is providing the services. What we care about is cost of receiving that service, the speed, and the quality of the service, right? And this is where the fintechs come in. You see, in the 80s, 90s, the value chain, the banking value chain started to get decoupled. So banks would start to take the low-value activities and give them to third-party service providers, like your call center, like some of your, sending of statements, etc. But since then, the value chain has become more and more decoupled. You now have technology service providers coming in with specialized services across the entire spectrum. So you'll have treasury-related solutions, you'll have payment-related solutions, you'll have client onboarding, you'll have analytics. So now the entire value chain has actually become decoupled, where you have specialist providers that use technology to provide a certain piece of that value chain service. And this is where fintechs are coming in. They're using technology like analytics, artificial intelligence, blockchain, Internet of Things, mobility, etc., to come up with specific services and solutions for part of the value chain. Now, does that mean banks should be worried? Yes, especially on the retail banking side. Do banks need to do something about it? Yes. Are banks doing something about it? Question mark, question mark. How many bank representatives here have actually engaged a fintech to help solve a certain problem that they have today? How many of you guys have engaged fintechs? None, which is worrying and surprising, because when you look at banks today, they come in all shapes and sizes. Many of them have legacy issues. Many of them have large-scale transformation projects going on, but they're trying to take the classic in-house approach of, here is a problem, let me get a consultant, let me do this in-house. And by the time you've actually built your solution, you've solved only a problem for yesterday. You see, today banks have a problem. Let's say the turnaround time is too long, the cost of providing a service is too high, the service quality is not too good. So you say, we'll have a technology project. It'll take us 12 to 18 months to finish deploying that project. By the time that project is finished, what you have actually done is solved for a problem of today in 18 months' time. So in 18 months' time, you're going to have a new problem. And this is where fintechs can help banks leapfrog some of the problems they have today. They can help them do things faster. They can help them do things better and cheaper, because you don't have to build that technology in-house. You don't have to worry about a lot of APIs and a lot of integration if you're starting to do these things in-house. You can actually leverage a lot of the fintechs that are out there. And this is, we worked with one of the entities in UAE last year to come up with a fintech innovation challenge, and the objective was, how many problems can you actually solve? And it's amazing how many fintech solutions are already out there, but a lot of organizations are still not using them. And why are people not using fintechs? Because of this resistance, and also because lack of an understanding and appreciation. All fintechs do is they give you a solution for part of your problem. Not the whole problem, part of the problem. The challenge banks have is, how do you take those different fintechs and get them to work together? But nevertheless, you'll be able to do things faster, better, and cheaper. At the same time, what fintechs don't have is cash. They have very limited funds, because most of them are in the startup mode. Banks have that. You have capital. You have money to spend. Fintechs don't have that. You have customers, which fintechs don't have. But why aren't fintechs and banks collaborating? The data point is in front of you. Nobody raised their hand to say we're collaborating with a fintech. At the same time, fintechs also come in different shapes and sizes, right? So some of these fintechs have solutions which are going to be only internal to a bank. They're not for your customer, they're for yourself. So for example, AML monitoring, transaction monitoring, thinking about false positives, etc. Those are solutions that banks are going to consume. Then you have products that fintechs are offering that are going to be beneficial to your customers. So those fintech solutions are being offered through you guys, and these will be payment services, client onboarding, electronic KYC, etc. Right? And the last category, which is fintechs that are competing with you guys like for like. Those are very few, and the regulations these days don't allow fintechs to really become a bank. So there is a bit of a time in which you can think about how you want to realign your thinking. But going ahead, let's think about the future, right? I personally think that retail banks, if they don't innovate, if they don't think about what's happening, they will actually disappear. They're already becoming more and more invisible. If you look at Europe, where you have the open banking and PSD2 coming, all that means is a bank is really a custodian of your money. That is it. The payments, the transactions can now be provided by third-party service providers. Now, historically, banks used to make a lot of money in the transaction fees and the cross-border payments, etc., but all of that is going away. So what do banks now need to do? Well, in my view, they need to think about trying to solve for tomorrow's problems today rather than solving today's problems tomorrow. They also need to think about working with fintech providers, because why reinvent the wheel when you can take it at a much lower cost, you can adjust it and fit it, and at the same time really think about their role in the banking value chain. You know, with electronic digital mobile wallets coming, peer-to-peer transactions coming, remittance, payments, etc., what is it that a retail bank especially is going to be left to offer? Like what we are seeing in Europe, just a place where they'll hold your value, but everything else to do with the value in terms of lending it, borrowing it, transferring it, remitting it, exchanging it, is all being done by third-party service providers. So in a nutshell, I think in a place like Oman, digital fintechs, etc., have a real opportunity, because it's very expensive for banks to continue to operate branches, you know, given the geographic size of the country. There are fintech providers out there that can give you really smart solutions. And I think working with the regulator, I think the way forward for fintechs and banks is a lot more collaboration. Only then are you going to be able to innovate rather than trying to solve all problems on your own. So that's all I wanted to share. Happy to take some questions. And I was conscious of time because I know lunch is there just after this session. So keen to hear some thoughts from the audience otherwise. Yes, sir.
Hello.
Yeah.
Thank you for the quick recap on the fintechs.
Yeah.
So my question first, I personally do agree on that there is no major innovating on the banking, so on the next other than the ATMs. So my question to you is why?
Why?
So because I don't think it's the idea. I'm sure we have 7 point something billion around the world.
Yeah.
So there must be some ideas. So from your point of view, why we don't have?
Yeah. So
Sorry, I have another question.
Sure.
We have been talking about fintechs in many forums. So at least in the last 2 years, every month you will have a forums on fintechs around the world. So when you are talking about Oman, what kind of fintechs do you think would fit a market like Oman?
Excellent. Very good questions.
Thank you.
Really, really thank you for those. So first question is, why are banks not innovating? Why is it that banks are not innovating? I mean, before I share my views, anybody has a view on why? Yes, sir. Why do you think banks are not innovating? Yeah.
I actually think on the contrary. It's not that the banks are not innovating. And one of the examples is Al-Azz Islamic Bank. We've introduced ITMs, which are interactive teller machines, not just normal ATMs, besides having a very good platform, mobile banking platform as well. So innovations are there. They are coming. Might be a little bit slow in adapting to those innovations, but banks are definitely innovating. We're all looking at fintech. We all have mobile wallets at the moment. So innovation actually does exist. Maybe the adaptation is a bit slow, but besides that, banks are definitely innovating.
Okay. So before I answer your question, it's important to make the distinction between innovation and renovation. Okay. So an interactive teller, an interactive machine, right, I personally think is more a renovation of a teller that doesn't talk back to you, not really an innovation. Okay, this is my humble opinion. So banks have been good at renovating, but the challenge is why banks are not innovating is because of this sheer size and complexity and internal bureaucracy of an organization. You see, banks are playing catch-up, legacy systems, new products coming, let's bolt on another solution, then we have processes, then we have regulations, then we have people and competencies and capabilities. So when you have any organization, especially like a bank which has all these complexities, the will is there, but the mechanics are not there to support it. This is why startups, when they're small, agile, nimble, and they focus on one part of the problem, they're able to innovate. The second thing is, for innovation to happen, you need collaboration. Collaboration is a key ingredient for innovation. How collaborative are banks of today? Not. Banks don't collaborate. In fact, banks don't like to collaborate. Just the very nature of banking is secrecy, privacy, my trade secrets I don't want to share. So banks don't collaborate. And that's why banks struggle to innovate. So you have the legacy of the organization, the bureaucracy of the organization, and then you have lack of collaboration. How much R&D does your bank do today? How much R&D happens in a bank? Raise your hand. Are you just going to another bank's website, some developed country like Singapore, Europe, USA, and seeing what products they have? Let me just copy. That's the Samsung model. It worked for them, but is it going to continue to work in banking? I don't think so, right? So you have legacy organizations, bureaucracy of the legacy, you don't collaborate, and you don't do R&D, right? For any innovation, you need R&D. These pharmaceutical companies spend billions on R&D. These other companies spend billions on R&D. Banks don't spend on R&D. So how do you expect to innovate because of these three issues? And this is why I think banks are going to get disrupted. I mean, banking is getting disrupted, and oftentimes people think that banks have to exist to provide banking, and I would say no. In the future, we will not need banks to provide banking, because there was a time before banks existed that banking was still happening, but you didn't need banks to exist at the time. Now, coming to your question about what's needed in Oman, I think for any country, right, you have to understand what are the key unique challenges to that place. So it's very different to UAE, it's very different to other countries in the GCC, so you cannot just import, okay? So you have to take a look at the grassroots level, what are the challenges people are having on a day-to-day basis. So this morning I took a taxi from a client to come here, and I realized Uber doesn't exist here, Careem doesn't exist here, but that's fine, right? So if I'm a foreigner and I need to pay the taxi driver with my card, how do I do that? Now, installing a device is cost prohibitive. The 2% that you add on to that eats into the revenue of the taxi driver. But in places like Singapore and other parts of Asia, you now have QR payments that very seamlessly, at a very low cost, transaction happens, right? So in my view, you have to look at the local challenges of the market. For example, the geographic size of the country. You have lots of villages in different parts. How do you provide services to these people? So for you guys, the challenge is going to be to have localized solutions for localized problems, leveraging on the technology created elsewhere. You don't have to recreate the technology. You just have to redeploy it, keeping in mind your localized problem. And I can go on list of SMEs and other retailers, etc. But certainly in the retail space, in the low value transactions, how do you come up with a mechanism that provides transfer of value at a low cost? I see a big opportunity in that personally. Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah. No, I think I answered both of the questions. I did.
Hello.
Yes, sir.
My name is Mohammad Tayyib. I'm from Oman Arab Bank. From the discussion, we learned and rightly learned that fintech is going to change the retail banking altogether in future. But what do you think? How this fintech is going to impact the wholesale banking, the corporate banking, the retail banking? This is a bigger impact. This has a bigger size in the banking.
Excellent.
How
Very
does it
good.
impact?
Very good question, right? Anybody from the Treasury Department here? Anybody from Treasury? Okay, so let's take Treasury as an example. Your role is to maximize profitability by taking the funds and deploying them, right? So you have excess liquidity, how do you deploy it? If you're in a crunch for liquidity, how do you get it? Or FX, right? Foreign exchange, right? Where you're thinking about rates, etc. You now have platforms that are playing the roles of aggregators that can give you better rates than any treasury desk in any standalone bank. These aggregators are fintech startups. Similarly, trade finance with technology like blockchain, where a lot of money that banks made was on trade finance, verification of documents, taking on counterparty risk, etc., etc. With blockchain technology, that is going to get eliminated. Similarly, for corporate customers, right? Why do corporate customers come to a bank? Rates, service, credit lines. Yeah? For each of these, I can give you examples where you now have fintech solutions that are able to give you a faster, better, and cheaper alternate. Now, they're not all fully matured, developed solutions, so there is a time lag between when that solution is really deployable, right, to where it is today. But I think the one message I want to leave with the banks is you can no longer be complacent. Honestly. What happened to Kodak? What happened to BlackBerry? What happened to Nokia? What happened to taxis? What happened to hotels? It's only a matter of time before it happens to you guys. Honestly. I've worked with banks for 15 years. I've been working a lot in the last couple of years with fintechs, with regtechs. The regulators are also waking up. They are realizing that there is only so much regulation can be there to protect the interests of the banks. It's only a matter of time before technology companies really start to give you a run for your money. Honestly. Any other questions? Okay, thank you so much.